Every murder case has a beginning. Most of them begin the same way, with a phone call. A voice on the other end of the line, breathless, panicked, begging for help. In most cases, that voice belongs to someone who just witnessed the worst moment of their life. But in some cases, in the rarest, most chilling cases, that voice belongs to someone else entirely. Someone who already knows exactly what happened. Someone who is, in that very moment, performing for an audience they don't even know is listening yet. This is one of those cases. Tonight, we're breaking down the case that shocked a small Midwestern community. The murder of Sarah Mitchell, a 34-year-old schoolteacher, found dead in her own home on a quiet Tuesday morning. What followed was a 911 call that, on its surface, sounded like pure grief. But as investigators would soon discover, that call would become Exhibit A in one of the most damning prosecutions in the county's history. By the end of this video, you'll understand how a single locked door, one search history, and 47 seconds of phone audio brought down a killer who almost got away with it. Let's start at the beginning. It was 7:42 in the morning when the call came in. 911, what's your emergency? Oh my God. Oh my God. Please, you have to send someone. It's my wife, I think. I think she's not breathing. There's so much blood. Please hurry. The voice belonged to David Mitchell, Sarah's husband of 6 years. According to the call, David had just returned home from an early morning run when he found his wife unresponsive on the kitchen floor. He was, by every audible measure, in absolute hysterics. His voice cracked. He sobbed. He begged the dispatcher to stay on the line with him. At one point, he can be heard saying, "I can't lose her. I can't lose her. Please, God, no." To anyone listening to this call cold, without any other context, it sounds exactly like what it's supposed to sound like. A husband, devastated, discovering the unthinkable. But here's where things start to get interesting. Because law and crime followers know, it's never just about what's said. It's about what's not said. And it's about what happens next. Police arrived at the residence at 7:51 a.m., just 9 minutes after the call. Bodycam footage from the responding officers shows David Mitchell standing on the front porch, still in his running clothes, still breathing heavily. But here's the thing. The crying had stopped. Completely. Watch the footage closely. As the officers approach, David's posture changes. His voice, which moments earlier on the phone had been shaking, barely able to form words, is now calm. Measured. He calmly directs the officers inside. He tells them, almost matter-of-factly, "She's in the kitchen. I already checked her pulse. There's nothing you can do." Now, to be fair, grief affects people differently. Shock can manifest in strange ways. Some people go numb. Some people dissociate. A sudden switch from hysteria to calm isn't, on its own, evidence of anything. But it was enough to make one of the responding officers, a 12-year veteran named Officer Reyes, pause. In his report, Reyes wrote, "Subject's demeanor on scene did not match the level of distress described in the initial call. Subject appeared composed, almost detached, while providing details of the scene." That single line, buried in a routine police report, would become one of the first threads investigators pulled on. And once they started pulling, the whole story began to unravel. Inside the home, officers found Sarah Mitchell's body in the kitchen, near the back door. The cause of death would later be determined as blunt force trauma, multiple impacts to the head, consistent with a heavy object. There was no immediate murder weapon found at the scene. The kitchen showed signs of a struggle, a chair knocked over, broken glass near the sink, and blood spatter consistent with the body. On its face, it was a tragic, almost textbook home invasion scenario. A husband leaves for a run. A stranger breaks in. A confrontation turns deadly. The husband returns to a nightmare. Except for one detail that didn't add up. And it would take a sharp-eyed detective just one question to expose it. 3 days after the murder, David Mitchell was brought in for what was described as a follow-up interview. In reality, it was anything but routine. By this point, detectives had already reviewed the bodycam footage, cross-referenced the 911 call, and begun building a timeline that didn't quite fit David's story. The interrogation room is small. Gray walls, a metal table, 2 chairs. David sits across from Detective Karen Vance, a 22-year veteran of the department's homicide division. For the first 30 minutes, the conversation is almost gentle. Detective Vance offers David coffee. She tells him she's just trying to get a clearer picture of that morning. She lets him talk, and talk he does. David describes, in painstaking detail, his usual running route. He describes leaving through the front door. He describes the weather that morning, slightly chilly, he says, which is why he wore a jacket. He describes coming back, noticing the back door open, and finding Sarah. Throughout this, David presents himself as the victim. He talks about how much he loved Sarah, how they'd been trying to start a family, how he can't sleep, can't eat, can't stop replaying that morning over and over in his head. At one point, he breaks down crying. And to anyone watching, it's a convincing performance. But Detective Vance has been doing this for over 2 decades. And she's noticed something. Something small. Something that David, in all his careful preparation, didn't account for. She leans back in her chair. And she asks one question. David, you said you left through the front door for your run, correct? Yes, that's right. And when you came back, the back door was open. That's how the intruder got in and out. Right? It was ajar, like I said. Okay. Vance pauses. She flips through a folder, almost casually. Here's what's confusing me. Our crime scene unit processed both doors. The front door, the one you said you left through, was locked from the inside when officers arrived. Deadbolt. The kind of lock that can only be engaged from inside the house. Silence. So if you left through the front door for your run, how did it get locked from the inside after you left? This is the moment. This is the moment the entire case turns on. Watch David's face in this footage. For just a fraction of a second, less than 2 seconds, his expression changes. His eyes dart, almost imperceptibly, to the side. His jaw tightens. And then, just as quickly, he tries to recover. I must have locked it out of habit. I do that sometimes. Lock it behind me. You locked a deadbolt from outside the house. With a key? Yes. I have a key. Do you usually carry that key on your morning runs, David? Another pause. Longer this time. I don't know. Maybe. I wasn't really thinking about it. Detective Vance doesn't push further in this moment. She doesn't need to. She's planted the seed. And over the next 2 hours of questioning, that seed grows into a forest of inconsistencies. David's timeline starts to shift. First, he says he left at 6:30. Then he says it might have been closer to 6:45. Then he can't remember if he stretched before or after leaving the house. Small details. The kind of details that don't matter when you're telling the truth, because the truth doesn't need to be remembered. It just is. But when you're lying, every detail is a potential trap, and the more questions you're asked, the more traps you stumble into. By the end of the interview, David Mitchell has contradicted himself on his timeline 4 separate times. He's claimed 3 different routes for his run. And critically, when asked directly whether he and Sarah had been arguing recently, he initially says no. Completely fine. Happy marriage. Detectives already know that's not true. Because 3 weeks before the murder, Sarah had told her sister, in a text message that would later become a key piece of evidence, that she and David had been fighting nonstop, and that she was starting to think this marriage was a mistake. When confronted with this text message, David's composure finally breaks, not into more tears, but into something colder. He becomes defensive, agitated. He says the argument was nothing serious. He says Sarah exaggerated everything. And in a moment that would later be played for the jury, he says, almost under his breath, she always made everything so dramatic. Past tense. Made. Not makes. A small slip, but a telling one. The interview ends shortly after. David is not arrested that day. Investigators don't yet have enough for an arrest. But they have enough to know exactly where to look next. That it would take investigators another 5 months to build the case that would eventually go to trial. 5 months of digital forensics, financial records, phone data, and, critically, search history. Because here's what detectives found when they obtained a warrant for David Mitchell's laptop and phone. In the weeks leading up to Sarah's murder, David's search history showed a pattern that prosecutors would later describe as a roadmap to murder. Searches included things like how long does it take police to respond to 911 calls in county, blunt force trauma cause of death, how to make a break-in look real, and, perhaps most damning of all, a search made just 4 days before the murder, life insurance payout spouse death. That last search was particularly significant because it tied directly into the financial motive prosecutors had uncovered. Sarah Mitchell had a life insurance policy worth $750,000, and 6 months before her death, David had been added as the sole beneficiary, replacing Sarah's mother, who had previously held that role. Financial records also showed that David's small business, a landscaping company, had been hemorrhaging money, with over $80,000 in business debt and a second mortgage on the house that was 3 months behind on payments. In the courtroom, this is where things get electric. Picture it. The prosecutor, a sharp, methodical attorney named Michael Torres, stands before the jury with a large screen behind him. On that screen, one by one, the search history results appear, each one time-stamped, each one undeniable. Members of the jury, Torres says, the defendant would have you believe that on the morning of March 14th, an unknown intruder entered the Mitchell residence, murdered Sarah Mitchell, and vanished without a trace, leaving no fingerprints, no DNA, no forensic evidence whatsoever. No signs of forced entry. Nothing taken from the home, despite Sarah's jewelry, a laptop, and over $200 in cash sitting in plain view. He pauses, letting that sink in. But 4 days before Sarah Mitchell was murdered, someone sitting in that house searched for the exact payout amount of her life insurance policy. 3 weeks before, that same person searched for how to make a break-in look convincing. And 2 months before that, searched for how long blunt force trauma takes to cause death. Torres turns to face David Mitchell directly. That person was the defendant. The defense, for their part, attempts to argue that the search history could have been accessed by anyone, that shared computers and family devices make digital evidence unreliable. They bring in their own forensic expert, who testifies that without a password log or biometric confirmation, it's impossible to definitively prove who was sitting at the keyboard during each search. It's a reasonable point, and for a moment, it seems to land with at least some members of the jury. But then Torres does something that, according to several jurors interviewed after the trial, became the turning point of the entire case. He brings up the timestamps again, but this time cross-referenced with cell phone location data. The search for life insurance payout spouse death was made at 11:47 p.m. on March 10th. Sarah Mitchell's phone shows she was already asleep by that point. Her phone hadn't been touched since 10:15 p.m., and her smartwatch data showed her heart rate had dropped into a resting sleep pattern by 10:30. David's phone, however, shows activity at 11:47 p.m. A notification was dismissed. The screen was unlocked. The defense wants you to believe this could have been anyone, Torres says. But Sarah Mitchell was asleep. The defendant's phone was active. The defendant's laptop was used. And 4 days later, Sarah Mitchell was dead, and the defendant was the sole beneficiary of a $750,000 policy. The courtroom is silent. Then comes what many true crime followers consider the most dramatic moment of the entire trial: the cross-examination of David Mitchell himself, who, against the advice of many observers, took the stand in his own defense. For nearly 2 hours, Torres walks David through every inconsistency from that initial interrogation. The locked door, the shifting timeline, the made everything so dramatic comment. Each time, David offers an explanation. Each time, the explanation requires the jury to believe something slightly more improbable than the last. But the moment that truly seals it comes when Torres asks David to explain, one more time, how the front door deadbolt was locked from the inside if he had left through that door. David, visibly rattled after hours of testimony, says, "I told you. I must have locked it out of habit." Torres nods slowly. Then he asks, "David, is it your habit to lock a deadbolt behind you using a key from outside your own home every single time you go for a run?" "Sometimes. Every time. Or sometimes. I don't. I don't remember every time." "You don't remember. But you remember locking it that specific morning, the morning your wife was murdered, clearly enough to testify to it under oath. Today, 5 months later." David doesn't answer. The silence stretches for nearly 10 full seconds, an eternity in a courtroom. Several jurors later said this was the exact moment they made up their minds. After 11 days of testimony, the jury deliberated for just under 6 hours before reaching a verdict. Guilty, on all counts. First-degree murder. The cameras in the courtroom captured David Mitchell's face in the exact moment the verdict was read. For weeks, he had maintained his composure, the same eerie calm that Officer Reyes had first noted on the morning of the murder. But as the word guilty was spoken, something in his expression cracked. Not into tears, into something closer to disbelief. Almost confusion, as if some part of him truly believed he would walk away from this. He did not look at the jury. He did not look at his attorney. For several seconds, he simply stared straight ahead, blinking, as if trying to process information his mind refused to accept. Then came the sentencing hearing, and with it, the moment that, for many, defines what these cases are really about. Because after all the forensic evidence, after all the search history and phone records and courtroom theatrics, at the end of the day, this was never just a case. It was a person, a real woman, with a real family, who trusted the person sitting across the courtroom from them. Sarah's mother, Linda, stood before the court to deliver her victim impact statement. Her voice, unlike David's performance on that 911 call 5 months earlier, was raw, unrehearsed, real. Sarah used to call me every Sunday, Linda said. Every single Sunday, without fail, for 15 years. She'd tell me about her students, about her week, about her plans with David. She trusted him completely. She told me once, and I'll never forget this, she told me, "Mom, I feel so safe with him." Linda paused, gripping the podium. She felt safe. In her own home. With the person who was supposed to protect her. And he took that. He took her safety, and he turned it into a weapon. He used her trust to get close enough to end her life. And then he picked up a phone and pretended to grieve for the cameras, for the police, for all of us, while knowing exactly what he had done. Sarah's sister, Emily, spoke next. Her statement was shorter, but no less powerful. "I keep thinking about that 911 call," Emily said. "Everyone heard it. Everyone felt for him. I felt for him. And that's what makes this so hard. Because for those first few days, I comforted him. I told him it would be okay. I hugged him at the funeral. And the entire time, he knew." She looked directly at David for the first time during the entire hearing. "You let us grieve next to you. You let us comfort you, while you knew exactly what you took from us." David Mitchell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no visible reaction as the sentence was read. The case of Sarah Mitchell is, in many ways, a textbook example of why investigators say the first 24 to 48 hours of any case are the most critical, and why first impressions, even ones as small as a tone of voice on a 911 call, can end up being the thread that unravels everything. It's also a reminder of something darker, that sometimes the person performing the most grief is the person with the most to hide. That sometimes the mask doesn't slip because of dramatic confrontation. It slips in small, quiet moments. A locked door that shouldn't be locked. A verb tense that shouldn't have changed. A search history that was never supposed to be found. David Mitchell believed he had thought of everything. He hadn't. And because of one detective's sharp memory, one overlooked deadbolt, and a digital trail that never truly disappears, justice, in this case, was finally served. If you found this case as compelling as we did, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth breakdowns of the cases that define the headlines. This is a fully fictional story. Sarah Mitchell, David Mitchell, Linda, Emily, Detective Vance, Officer Reyes, Prosecutor Michael Torres are all invented names, written for narration purposes. If you'd like, I can save this as a downloadable document or adjust pacing/tone for a specific runtime.